If you thought 55 minutes of tea meant the feud was thawing, today's twist says otherwise. Hours after that tightly controlled reunion at Clarence House, Prince Harry stepped into Kiev with the Invictus Foundation and dropped a line that ricocheted through royal circles. Over the last 4 years he's faced litigation, uncertainty, and learned certain things that have really, really hurt. Then the sentence that turned a reunion into a referendum: you cannot have reconciliation before you have truth. That isn't a slogan. It's a negotiating position, and it leaves the palace with a choice it hates to make. Let's rewind the tape with the sound all the way up. The London leg was deliberately quiet. One car, one door, no trailing entourage, no breathless briefing. A short meeting, a careful exit, and only one public sentence from Harry, his great thank you about the King's health. No intimacy on display, no triumphalist smiles for the cameras, just the absence of leaks. Then he flies to Ukraine, where the optics write themselves: a war-scarred city, a hospital corridor, the hum of prosthetic labs, veterans who do not perform for anyone. In that setting, he rejects the caricature that he's miserable in Montecito, says he likes the life he lives, and crucially refuses to repent for spare. He insists it corrected the record, he didn't air dirty laundry, and his conscience is clear. If you were waiting for contrition as an entry ticket back to the fold, that door didn't open. What did open is a new way to read his timeline. London for blood, Kiev for purpose, back to California for home. That rhythm matters. It says he'll show up when it counts, he'll set his own security and schedule, and he'll do it without trading silence for access. He is plainly tying proximity to the King to a single condition: tell the truth. Not the prettified truth of a palace press note, the lived truth of what he says he uncovered in legal filings, phone hacking claims, and years of private disappointments. The vagueness is intentional. It keeps the temperature high while giving him room to maneuver, and it puts pressure on anyone who thinks a photographed handshake equals peace. There's a human clock here that we must not ignore. The King is 76 and fighting cancer. Harry said publicly he wants to see his father more, and that lands with the weight of mortality. But there's a second clock ticking next to it, the accountability one. That is the clock Harry started in Kiev. Both are ticking at once, and that's why a quiet cup of tea suddenly sounds like a countdown. Watch how the message has tightened. He loves the UK, he misses the causes and the people he grew up serving, he's most himself in veteran spaces where the masks come off. He says the work is what matters and insists he doesn't like staged photos. Translation: he'll be seen when there's purpose, not for optics. That, more than anything, is what unsettles the palace machinery. The institution knows how to metabolize a red carpet return. It does not know how to absorb a free agent who can drop into London, meet the King without a comms circus, then fly to a war zone and seize the moral high ground with a single sentence about truth. And what of William? This is the part the polite readouts never say out loud. The heir's logic has been consistent for years: if you speak out against the family and the crown, you don't get to waltz back in. He frames it as protection of the monarchy, of his wife, of their children, of the principle that duty comes before grievance. In that worldview, reconciliation is a private deed, not a public debate, and it certainly doesn't start with conditions. Harry's formulation flips that: acknowledgement first, relationship second. Put those two philosophies side by side and you can see why one cup of tea didn't melt a decade of ice. The Kiev appearance sharpened the contrast. In a place where performative gestures wither, Harry praised the veteran community, admitted he hates staged snaps, and owned the risk of being there. That's the through line of Invictus: purpose over PR. It also answers his critics on two fronts. First, he's not hiding, he's taking the harder, less comfortable route. Second, he's reminding everyone why he mattered as a working royal in the first place. He is ridiculous with crowds, funny with kids, fluent with soldiers and medics, and completely at ease when the cameras are off. It's not nostalgia, it's proof of concept. Now, about those certain things that really, really hurt. He will not name them. Not yet. Notice the framing: he ties the pain to litigation and to what he's learned while fighting those battles. That allows him to hint at facts without disclosing them, to demand a reckoning without detonating the room. It is a pressure tactic, but it's also a shield. As long as he keeps the specifics under wraps, he can honor a private meeting with the king while insisting that any real reconciliation must deal with more than feelings. If the palace wants to move this story along, it will have to adopt at least a sliver of that vocabulary, something as small as an agreed sentence about hurt on all sides or as practical as a structured plan for boundaries, security, and press conduct. The content matters less than the admission that silence alone will not fix this. There's also the Meghan question, and Harry answered it between the lines. He didn't drag her into Kiev and didn't stage their marriage as a narrative device. He spoke about his father, his love for the UK, his work, his clarity about Spare. That decoupling is tactical. It reduces the culture war noise and isolates his relationship with his father from the permanent Meghan discourse machine. If the goal is to rebuild trust brick by brick with one person, the king, that's how you start. Public sentiment. It's shifting, but not in a straight line. People who don't like Harry still don't like him, and they likely never will. But a sizable middle will always respond to service, to risk, to the humility of sitting with wounded veterans and letting the camera drift off your face. He's smart enough to know that. He's also smart enough to know that one misstep, one leak, one overheated quote, and the narrative snaps back. Which is why the discipline of these last few days matters. No victory laps. No cryptic Instagram posts. No surrogates freelancing self-serving sources say. Just work, one sentence about the king, and one sentence about truth. Inside Buckingham Palace, the mood is complicated. Relief that the meeting happened at all. Anxiety about what truth might require. A grudging recognition that the king looks better when he's seen as a father trying. And, yes, the familiar dread that anything involving Harry can veer out of bounds if it becomes a briefing war. That's the quiet success of this week. There was no war. Everyone stayed buttoned up. If that continues, you'll know both sides still want this to move forward, even if they disagree on how. So what does forward actually mean? More short, dense visits where Harry sees his father and ties in veteran work. Fewer grand reunions and more private conversations that don't leak. A slow normalization of him being in London without it triggering DEFCON 1. And hovering over all of it, the phrase he planted in Kiev, reconciliation waits on truth. Maybe truth is a private acknowledgement in a room with no phones. Maybe it's a letter, a line in a speech, a practical agreement around protection that stops the endless security wars. Maybe it's simply the decision to stop pretending there was no hurt. The shape can be modest. The effect will not be. Here's the paradox. The quieter Harry gets about specifics, the louder the sentence becomes. Truth before reconciliation has a way of echoing through every corridor, from the press office to the private apartments. It's ruthless in its simplicity, because it forces a choice. You can ignore it and live with the Cold War. You can try to drown it in pageantry and hope the public forgets. Or you can test it, privately, and see if it breaks the stalemate. That's why this week mattered more than a photo ever could. For once, the optics weren't the point. The terms were. If you've made it this far, tell me in the comments what truth looks like to you in real life, not fantasy. Is it a quiet meeting that ends with a hug and no statement? Is it a public line that admits harm and draws a boundary? Is it a signed framework for how and when the Sussexes engage in UK work without reigniting the firestorm? There are no perfect answers here, only workable ones. For now, Harry leaves with momentum he hasn't felt in years. He came, he met his father without drama, he did the work in a city that tests the soul, and he left a sentence hanging in the air that no one can hear. The next time you see him in Britain, watch for the same discipline, unannounced, purposeful, brief, and quiet. If that pattern holds, the thaw is real even if it's happening on his terms. If this gave you a clearer view of where the story really sits, tap like so more people find it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next turn. We'll be here when the clocks tick again.